hide those and present slides. And well, I'm cheating a little bit. This isn't here. It's where I wish I was, and it's a temperature that I wish it was. Um, so last term, teaching the course on day 3 that morning, it was 10 o'clock class, I think. I was in Kingsburg, and this is what we were looking at. And it was a reasonably warm day. As we get in September, we get some really great weather around here. And actually, I think I taught the class outdoors. I sat at a little table that had a bit of shade to it, because if I sat way out here in the middle of the deck, the sun was too bright. I couldn't see my screen. But we're not there anymore, back in Halifax. But as I've told you before, Dora insists I get some exercise and get out. And, well, to get out in the morning before an 8:30 class. This is this morning down at the Northwest Arm. If Osama was showing you the last week, last class, the Bedford Basin, which is one side of Halifax. The Northwest Arm is the other side of Halifax. So we've got water all around us. And I happen to live just off of the peninsula, not that far away from the Arm. And this is an area where Dora and I often walk early in the morning or late in the evening, because it's not far away from home. Don't know if you can see it. There's a little bump over here. If you know Halifax, that's the Dingle Tower. And there's a little bump over here. That's the Loyola High Rise. So let's put things in perspective. Anyway, let's get on with things. And a few reminders. We've got a quiz coming up on Saturday again. Every Saturday there's a quiz, and you should be getting 9 out of 10 at least every time. That's the goal. But the Friday after that, so a week from this Friday, is going to be our first test. And it's like taking the questions from quiz 1 and the questions from quiz 2 and putting them together, and just giving you 16 questions. You have an hour to do them. That it's still open book. You can go look, search the web, whatever. And you have a little bit of time to do searching for the answers, but not a lot of time. There's 60 minutes. You'll find with some tests later in the term, you have to do a bit of calculation. And so that, again, uses up your time. Searching for things is more challenging to do, but it still should be adequate time. If you find yourself pressed for time on my test, let me know. Last term, we started out at 45 minutes, and I had a couple students say that they were pressed for time. So we increased it to 60 minutes. So it's not, I don't want you to go in a hurry to do it. I don't want to test how fast you can do it. But I want to give you less time to search for the answer, and you only get one try with each question. So it's quite different. So I'm getting a live sample ready at the moment. So it isn't just a set of questions. You've already seen similar questions, but how does Top Hat respond, and how do you interact with the software? I want to make sure you've seen that before the end of this week. So that's important for us to get through. And I'm trying to get your assignment 1 ready. It'll be due the 29th, so it's still a little ways away, 2 weeks. And for it, I need data, and I'm still waiting for more students to respond to the survey. I expect you're the more committed students, and you've probably already responded, but I'll put a reminder out anyway. As of this morning, I've got 178 responses. My target's 250. I'd like to close the survey by Monday and have that data set ready for us to start analyzing. So we've gone through what is data analytics. We've gone through talking about it being a process that we do things. And that process starts with defining a business issue, and it'll end eventually with recommendations, implementation, that deployment phase. So we're going to be starting in not so much the business issue, but getting more into the data issue first. And so what I want to do is move from business issue to data issue, so a data problem and what to sort of think about. Today we're going to be looking at where do we get the data, what does some of the issues we have to think about with data. Just it's boring, a lot of jargon, a lot of terminology and things, but we need that baseline. Big emphasis for me is going to be quality of the data. I'm going to keep questioning that all the way through the term. That think about, is the data really what you think it is? Because sometimes it isn't, or it's not quite. And how do we prepare that data so that we can do analysis? Because it isn't generally in the format we want it. We have to do some work. And the work is boring, but it's absolutely necessary so we can do it. That today I won't use Excel, but starting Monday, it's going to be Excel, Excel, Excel for probably 6 weeks, where every class is going to be Excel. So sort of ready for that. Uh, you may even want to have some of the demonstrations. Or all the demonstrations with Excel. You'll see the work summarized in PowerPoints, but generally I'll be doing it live, so that the PowerPoints will give you, like in a sense, like a recording, as if we didn't have a video, but I'll be doing it as a live demonstration with Excel all the way through. And as we get into the chapters, you'll find I've embedded um, short videos on the how-to aspects of Excel. That scares a lot of students. Excel Excel shouldn't scare you, but it's very picky. I find it a very frustrating environment. It doesn't always do what I want it to do. But before I do that, last class, and I can't think of who it was, said, "Are we going to talk about Hillary?" And this was that blog I suggested you read about the most poisoned name in history. I'm going to run through two stories very quickly, just as get us going and thinking about this. So, and in my mind, good data analytics is good storytelling. And you're going to hear me repeat storytelling over and over again. And to tell a really good story, when you read something, or you read a comic book or something that is a story, if you read a children's book, that you're reading the finished product. And if it's a really, really good one, you have to think about how much work went into that. Did it just happen? Did they sit down, someone write it? Boom, the story is told. In many instances, no, a pile of work went in behind the scenes, and it was boring work. And we're going to teach you how to do the boring work. So with Hillary, and this was one where a woman this blogger was upset about the name Hillary, that because of Hillary Clinton became an extremely unpopular name. And she wanted to write her story saying it was the most poisoned name in history. So she had to define poison. So how do we define that? So that's starting it with the business problem. And we're trying to move it to the data problem. So was it the greatest decrease in popularity as a baby name? And was that the first name or the middle name? And I think for most of us, it's that first name that when we think of things, it's the name you're called by. And for most of us, that's our first name. So let's settle on that. Uh, it shouldn't, it gets messy if we have to look at middle names as well. The spelling matter. She looked at it in two different spellings of Hillary. But what I must say, as an instructor over the last 40 years, is looking how the spelling of names has changed over time. Just a couple of years ago, I had 4 students in my class called Kaylee. And what Kaylee wasn't even a name I was familiar with when I was a kid, but probably the first time I saw it was Kaley. But these 4 students had radically different spellings of the name. So how do you do comparisons? And spelling, when you're analyzing text, ends up becoming an issue. Did they want it was fewer people naming their children Hillary? But our population, well, they were looking at the US. If we want to look back over time, she said, in history. So I don't know how far back you want to go, but the population was much smaller, even not that long ago. So maybe we've got to look at the percentage of babies that were named Hillary. And then is it change in the percentage or relative change? Going from 3% to 2%, is that the same as going from 2% to 1%? No, in terms of relative change. What are you trying to measure? Watch out. There are a lot of names that are fads. They suddenly become popular, and then a year later they drop again. And there's the issue of where do you get the data? Turned out she had a source of getting it, still needed a lot of cleaning. But you have to go through all of that type of work to tell the story. And then, boom, she summarized it with pictures. And pictures I like for telling stories. And so here was a whole bunch of names and the percent of babies over time getting these and how they change. And Hillary is this dark line here that went up and went down. And here's what we'd call fad names: Katina, Ashante, Farah, Leisha, so on. So those maybe don't count. So let's take out those ones. Okay. And then we get it out of the top 14. We can see a lot of these ones that became unpopular, they never were super popular. This one, it grew over a long period of time, then crashed. And that sort of tells me the story. So, um, and if you want to go back and look at even more names, and this is in more absolute terms, um, Marion used to be a very, very popular name as a percentage of babies given a name uh, that for religious connotations. And here are the two spellings of Hillary, with one L and with two L's. But again, it tells the story. Hey, this is a big shift. So that's an example of a story being told very quickly, one picture. And if you can do that, then you've done a great job. That think of children's books. Children's books tell the best stories, at least for small children, because they tell them in pictures as well as words, and that the child, it's if they can't read at that stage, the picture conveys the message. Uh, the Many years ago, almost 50 years ago, I spent a summer working in Germany. I'd studied German to some extent, but not an awful lot. And I started learning German by reading German comic books because the pictures helped me learn the words. They were telling me a story, which was fun, but it helped me learn language. Pictures are a very powerful tool. It's not something we'll look at a lot. Well, we'll look at periodically through the term and very heavily at the very end. Another one, though, and this is from a report that came out just before Christmas, and having to do with the impact of COVID on mortality. And it's been discouraging over the last year, debates about this. And I've asked you in the discussion question about how do you measure some of these sorts of things. And early on, particularly the people that felt this was all fake news, a big hoax, a way of stealing freedom, that say, can you really tell that the death was due to COVID? It's most of them, and these were public comments. Most of the people are old; they're going to die anyway. What's the big deal? And others saying, yeah, it's like the weather, snowfalls, that sort of thing. Some years it's up, some years it's down, average is out. Maybe we're just in a bad year. Big deal. It's all a hoax. It's all fake news. And we can roll out all of the data and all that sort of information. But these people that don't believe it will quickly get overwhelmed with all that information you're rolling out, and they won't believe you. So it was interesting. These are graphs that came out of Statistics Canada, and some of them revised by Nova Scotia's Department of Finance just before Christmas. And here's just one where it just showed number of deaths per million over the last year. Well, it was over a 44-week period leading up to the early part of December, and looking at the last 5 years. And yeah, every week it wiggles, goes up and down, Notice the yellow line. It's got a bit of a hump there. It's still a busy graph, not perfect. This is the one I like. This was very busy, but it tells an awful lot in it. The red line is the number of deaths per week on average for the last 5 years or so, and it's what they call their expected number. And we know that the mortality rate varies by time of year. It's higher um, in the winter months and it's lower in the summer months. There's variation, so they put a dotted line around it. I don't know if you can see that here, but they're little dotted lines. So we expect some variation, but it should stay within those dotted lines. And the blue line is this year. And so actually, we started the year with an unusually low number of deaths per week at the beginning of March. And then COVID really hit us. COVID really hit us in late March and into April. And then you see it way up above. So this picture down here is what they call excess mortality. So we're not saying, is the death because they died directly from COVID? Did they die from a phenol overdose? Um, and that's what we're seeing in BC is the number of drug overdoses has skyrocketed because the homeless people are not getting the types of support they normally would have during the year because of COVID and changes in other aspects around them. Their support network's gone. And so this blue line is saying these are how many more deaths we've got this year. COVID's the only big thing that's happened this year. So it's probably due to COVID. And how it caused those deaths may not be because you couldn't breathe anymore and you died, but because of other things. Maybe it's because you weren't able to get the surgery that you needed in a timely fashion because the hospitals were behind in the surgeries. It's still COVID is the underlying reason why this has happened. And this is why we need to get it under control. And as you can see, we're starting into the second wave here. This is beginning of December. It'll be interesting to see what's happens from beginning of December to the end of February. I think we're going to be seeing that other spike is going to be showing up. But this is an example of a powerful story, but a massive amount of work went into this and defining what it is and defining what the business problem is before it was done. This is what we're trying to do in the course. We don't need, for a lot of these stories, a lot of mathematics, but we need to have a good understanding of data. So it's a simple picture can tell a very powerful story, but you've got to think about what is it you're trying to say. Be very careful about that. Be very purposeful, direct. Know what it is, and sometimes that's hard to do. You need to know how to measure it, which for both Hillary, measuring how poisoned it is or impact of COVID, how do you want to measure that? Both of those are important. The data in both instances had a certain amount of cleaning that had to be done. And these ones I like because the final story was nice, simple. Um, so let's get into the boring stuff. Hopefully I don't bore you too much, but this is work we have to do. So from my experience, the biggest problem actually is at the very start because I find a lot of people feel they have a problem, but they can't explain what it is. They can't articulate it. They know they've got an issue. They may have ideas about the reasons for it. They may have ideas about solution, all that type of thing. I don't want them clouding things with that. I want to know what is it? What is it that they're trying to achieve? So, and I'll be drawing upon examples from my previous job when I was responsible for university enrollment. And that generally had to do with two things: how to get more students in the door, that was a recruitment one, and how to keep them here, that was a retention one. And that suppose I was being asked to prepare a report for the university, try to explain things, and I want to look at a specific aspect of how it's affecting students, whether that's in student recruitment or retention or success, money. And when I talk to students, that'll be one of the top things on their list of stressors for them is their finances. And it's a common, your student association will be arguing about this. But what do they mean? What exactly is the issue? University is expensive. Okay. But what's the issue? Uh, it's expensive is just a fact, but what exactly is the issue? That maybe I should rephrase this, and I have to go through this maybe a few times. That I'm saying that costs are increasing and student income is limited, and that's affecting academic and personal success and health. So I'm saying what the sort of issues are coming in, and I'm talking about some of the outputs on the other end. And I'm looking at the relationship. I'm putting some boundaries on this uh, that sort of, but not quite. It's still pretty broad. Uh, some folks, if I phrased it this way, would accuse me of bias at the outset, saying costs are increasing. And you'll get some, well, let's adjust for inflation or buying power. Well, even adjusting for that, yes, they're growing faster than inflation. That the student income being limited, and again, you may get some arguing about that, and it's should you be talking about the student's income or the amount of government support that they're getting or family incomes? There'll be debate. So this is still already messy. Okay? We need to define things more precisely. That I've probably got to go and define it in terms of a list of very specific questions that I've decided to go in, measure, analyze, and get results on that taken maybe as a totality describe the issue. And this is a common situation. But we need specific things so that I know when you ask me to do the data analysis, I know what I'm supposed to be analyzing. And even these are more specific, but they're still not exact yet. Um, what are the sources of student income? So where do you, what resources might be available to you to pay your bills? Okay, maybe it's getting a listing of them. I'd probably want to know how much you get from each and who gets it from different sources. If you're an international student, you don't get money from Canada's student loans because you're not eligible. So certain sources may not be available to certain student populations. That I might look at how does income vary among student populations. And so we do have certain groups of students, even if you're looking at Nova Scotia students, those that went to school here, uh, that different communities have different levels of income, and that has different impacts. I used to look at student demographics at Dal versus St. Mary's for the business program. And St. Mary's had a huge proportion of students that were working compared to Dalhousie, twice as many at least. Source of that? Dal has, in business, has more students from Ontario than from Nova Scotia. And if you're coming here from Ontario, then you're leaving home, which means you can afford to leave home. The bulk of the St. Mary's students lived in Halifax. They probably were going to St. Mary's in part because they couldn't afford to go to Western, or they couldn't afford to go to Queen's or go away somewhere. That income had big impacts on how students could do their degree. And so if they had a lower income, they compensated family income, compensated by working more hours on a part-time basis. Right, you're starting to think there. Um, who's working while going to school? How much are you working? Even that ends up not being simple. I need to know, are you working on campus or off campus? There's big differences between those two groups. Does working affect mental health? Positively, potentially. It does for students working on campus. Negatively for those working off campus. But we'd like to understand some of those sorts of things. Are you really stressed about paying for school? And how does that affect how you perform in your classes? And are you going to stay or are you going to leave? If you fail a lot of classes, you're probably going to leave. So I can come up with a whole bunch more specific questions, but even for the ones I've listed here, there are more questions behind those questions. you've got to go through a lot of that sort of thing and start listing these initially so that you know what data do you need to start studying this. Don't start collecting data until you know what questions you're trying to answer. You'll probably, all too often, surveys are done, they get lots of data. Turns out they're not the questions they really wanted answers to. With this stage, when you've got the list of questions, I'll often ask people, okay, imagine you've got the data to answer all of those. What are you going to do with it? And sometimes they find out, nothing. I really can't do anything. It was nice to know, but it's not going to change anything. If that's the case, don't collect the data. You haven't defined your questions. Try to define ones that are going to lead to actions at the other end, that there's a purpose to the question. And that gets back to defining the issue. Why are you raising the issue if it isn't to inform action? That's a huge amount of work. And it's an area that people race by incredibly quickly because they want to feel they're doing something. And one way of doing something is to collect the data. So go slow at the start. And in part, we're going to find in the initial CRISP model, we had this back and forth between business understanding, data understanding, in part. That's because we don't know what we're looking for. So we've got different sources. We can get it. If I was looking for this student data, I can pull a whole bunch out of Banner. I can do surveys like we're doing with our class. I can get data from potentially from a third party. Statistics Canada, I may be able to buy some. There's been some interesting research done that's been involved with linking some university data to uh, Canada Revenue Agency tax information. And under certain conditions, you can do a linking under certain controls to ensure privacy and so that you don't actually, the researchers don't actually see data on specific individuals, but they can link the data together. And the tax data gives us better data than maybe what we get in a survey. But there are different things if you want to think through it carefully. Some language for you. When we talk of a population, we're generally talking about everybody, who we'd like to talk about. If I'm trying to do a study on university or student finances and how it affects performance, am I talking about all university students in Canada, students in Nova Scotia, students at St. Mary's, students in the business program? Population is who I want to speak about and draw conclusions about. The sample is who I actually have data on. So even if I want to talk about the students in Management Science 1206 in this term, that's the 340 students that are currently enrolled today. But right now I've got a sample of 178. Are they the same? I don't know, because there's about 150 students or more, 170 students that haven't told me anything. I don't, I've only got half the class at the moment. That the, if I want to talk about customers, that I only have data about those that have bought my product or service, usually. So I only have data about St. Mary's students. I'd like to talk about students I wish we had at St. Mary's. Not that you're not great students, but if I want to have more, they're ones that aren't here right now. But I have no data about the students that never applied to us. So be careful as to who you're talking about here. Ideally, we want to generalize and talk about the general population. Generalize means about the general population. And I can only do that if my sample is a reasonable picture. So even if it's a fuzzy picture, if it's not high resolution, but it's correct, then I can do a lot with that. But if I want to take a picture of the Northwest Arm, even if it was one that with a poor camera, like mine is a poor one, not great resolution, I can still see it. But if I'm looking over here and not looking at the arm when I take my picture, and I sort of catch part of it, one side of the arm, but not the other, then no, I don't have a whole picture. So if my picture isn't of right on, then I've got issues. So generally, we say that the best way to get a sample is to take what we call a random sample. So everybody that's in the population could participate, and we may force them to participate. A survey where I put it out, everybody enrolled in this course has equal opportunity to participate, but a whole bunch choose not to. That's not a random sample, because those that participate and those that don't are doing it for some reason. That if I forced you, if I and Statistics Canada sometimes does this when they do a survey. By law, you have to respond to it with certain ones, and they can force you. They can send you to jail if they wanted to. They could fine you for not participating. So that way, they force all participants that they have randomly selected. They're doing a study right now on COVID, and they've sent out little test kits. They want to take a blood sample of thousands of Canadians to get a sense of COVID in the general population. And they've sent it out randomly, but it's still voluntary participation, so it's not a true random sample, because they're going to get lots of people that are going to say, no, I'm not going to give you any of my blood. Uh, to get a proper random sample, we need a proper experiment like you would do in a lab, which are tricky, but we can do sometimes. But we'll mention that hopefully if I don't talk too long, we'll get it later. Administrative data, I mean stuff that comes out of a database, like taking it out of the Banner database that we've got data stored on about you. And so Amazon, it's got many files on me. It's got one that has to do with addresses where I've shipped things to, because I haven't just shipped it to my house. I've sent it stuff to relatives or friends or that type of thing. Over time, I've used multiple credit cards. It's got all of them. Um, it, uh, it, of course, knows all about the transactions. It has all the history about the products I viewed. That it knows how long I stayed on it. It knows, did I go and look at reviews of the product? It that and knows, did I buy them eventually or buy something similar? Tons of data, and they're in a whole bunch of separate files, all connected to me in a sense. But they can use those connected ones to study products. They can use it to study different things of linking those files together. We call it a relational database because those files are linked by relationships. They're complicated. Banner is one where the data is in thousands and thousands of different tables, different files that are all interconnected. It's a mess to go and pull stuff from, or for idiots like me. So when I was registrar, I'd have someone pull the data for them. I'd say what I wanted, and they would know where to pull it, and they would extract it and bring it all and try to organize it for me. And I wanted it into something I could put into Excel. That's called a flat file. So it's got columns and it's got rows. The columns generally are the variables. Your name, your student ID, your this, across that way. And each row is one observation. So generally, if it was a student file, I would want one line for each student. And it would have your last name and first name and ID number. Um, Sometimes it gets messy, though, with certain variables. That if I want to know your English and your grade in English 1205, I'd need a column for English 1205 and your grade. But suppose you took it more than once. So should I have multiple records for you? I don't want that. I just want one per student. So should it be your best grade, your most recent grade? What if you never took it? I got a blank. All kinds of things there. But normally, our files are that columns, rows, and we just look at one. And that's all we'll look at in this course. Many times I've got to transform the data. And so often we call this process extract, and we transform it. And so I'm looking at summarizing things that the on your grade in English 1205, maybe I'm going to transform it by just taking the highest grade or the most recent grade. So I take all the grades on that course and combine them. Maybe I'm looking at purchase information and I average it. Uh, that frequently we will try to simplify it into something that better fits what we're trying to study, makes it more manageable because we've got so much information. And then finally, I load it into my spreadsheet. So if you hear people, these computer scientists talk of ETL, it took me years to understand what they were talking about. What this was, is they call extract, transform, load. Even when they gave me the words, I didn't know what it meant. It's their language. And if you're going to be working with them, you've got to start learning their language. So I could extract from Banner a whole bunch of different things, and here are all kinds of things, but I can, if I'm just looking at their finances and maybe some demographics, but you can start to see that um, it can get messy. If I start getting into scholarships and bursaries, a scholarship is based upon grades, a bursary is based upon financial need. Do I care? Should I differentiate? Sometimes the awards, it's not clear which is which. If a student has multiple awards, do we care? Or do we just want to know, do they have any of that type of money and how much? Uh, there's takes a while to figure out what data you're going to extract. That the frustrating part is that as rich as Banner is for data, for most of the problems I used to want to study, what I need isn't there because it's not stuff we capture. And it isn't absolutely necessary for the university to know this about you. So for privacy reasons and confidentiality, we may not go and ask some of those sorts of things. So I might have to get it in some other way. Oh my God, I'm looking across the street. I'm on a very steep hill. There's a FedEx truck just pulled up to make a delivery to someone. And um, the box was really big and heavy. It just went sliding out of the truck and landed about 12 feet behind it. I hope it wasn't fragile. Anyway, just an aside. Um, but uh, often it's hard to get the right data. That it's and often we have to get it from multiple sources, maybe surveys or whatever, and we try to merge it. It's not always easy. It does create issues. If I try to merge your responses to the survey that you're doing now with data from Banner, the only way I can do that is by linking your ID number, which means the survey isn't confidential anymore. How can I deal with that and ensure confidentiality of the survey responses um, when to be able to link it with other data that we've got in Banner, I can't do. It can be very tricky. So these surveys are great. We do a lot of them. Well, a lot of us hate doing surveys and responding to them, but they capture information that we generally don't have other ways. That um, and so that's what I've been doing this now for this is the fourth term. We've collected data on students, and it's very interesting stuff that I could never study within Banner. But as I said, when I merge the two, I've got some very tricky issues that happen. I'm not merging your data because I no longer have access to the Banner data either. But in the problems I frequently got with a survey and with merging is missing data. I got blanks. You didn't answer everything. As I said, I'd like the survey to be anonymous so that I get honest answers, but I've got personal information in the Banner database. How do I link them? And what if the responses are different? What if what we have in Banner is different from what's on the survey or this other database? Anytime we merge, we often find conflicts. The databases have conflicting information. There are lots of problems. With surveys, our single biggest problem is participation. I'm pushing for 75% participation rate in the survey this term. We've gotten that in the previous 3 surveys, which has been really, really good. It means there's only a quarter of the class I know nothing about. The other 3/4, if they were honest, I know a lot about. We're going to be using a lot, and it's used within the text, a survey that was done in 2010. And I like using it because it's a fairly big data set, 800 observations. But it was a survey that was done as part of a national survey of all St. Mary's students, and only 15% responded. So I don't know anything about the 85% that didn't. And so I don't know how representative it is, and does it really reflect our student body properly. These surveys are what we call observational data. Even Banner is observational data. I really don't have control. It's just data I've got. It's what I have at hand. And there are a lot of challenges in terms of trying to generalize when that's the case. That um, observational studies are our most common type of data. That how do I compensate for the missing 25? That is a great question. In some studies where we know that our data is unbalanced, we can try scaling it. That one with the from 2010 overrepresented females, because we know how many females responded in the survey, and we know how many were asked to participate in the survey. So what did they do to scale things? Sorry, ladies, but your responses, instead of counting you each as being one person, you were counted as being 0.8 people so that we'd get balance. We can try doing some of those adjustments, but I can only make adjustments on some really crude demographics that I know about and do the scaling. I can't do adjustments for a lot of the things I don't know about. You know, I don't know if the survey you've got has some basic mental health questions, which would be really useful to know about. But those it didn't answer, uh, I don't know anything about them. So if it was only 25%, if it's only 25, that's not too bad. If it's 50%, that's more serious. But did they not? You might think, well, they didn't answer because they don't care, but they've got their act together. They don't have mental health issues. They didn't feel they needed to participate in this thing. On the other hand, and maybe they're not participating because they're not engaged at all and they're suffering from very serious mental health issues. Can we make it mandatory? What's the punishment? What are we going to do to you if you don't participate? And ethically, it's wrong. I had a case, it came up in a meeting yesterday. They used to do surveys in 1205 on mental health in the Quant 1 course, and they gave students 2 bonus points for participating. And a student challenged this. They did not want to participate in that survey, and there were certain reasons for that, valid reasons. But that student, because they didn't participate, the student didn't participate, lost 2 bonus points. And the question was that ethical? And it isn't. That was unfair to the student. They were being punished for it. You can have a survey where you reward them. You get $10 if you participate, and you get money for doing it. That may be fine. You're not taking something away from someone. But some of these ones, in terms of making it mandatory, said that was a debate with the previous federal government, the Harper conservative governments, made the census, which should be is traditionally viewed as being a mandatory survey, so that we have baseline data on Canadians. The Harper government made it voluntary, and so now we no longer had the baseline. That baseline's used to allocate money to provinces for social services, for education, for health. All kinds of things are driven by that census data. And so it, in a sense, by making it voluntary, if it changed the numbers, could potentially disadvantage various groups. Yeah, bonus marks for doing a survey, to be honest, I think is unethical because it's penalizing the students that choose not to for valid reasons. Uh, they could have it if you log into the survey that you will automatically get the 0.5, but you have the option of not answering any questions. That may be fine because then you're not disclosing any information. But it is a big issue. And when you don't have the data, and what happened when the Harper government uh, made the census portion voluntary, for that year, our data is messed up. And you can, those people that study that sort of thing can see how it's distorted things. And certain groups have become underrepresented that we already have problems in getting them to respond. We'll find uh, First Nations people living on, um, not living, that are living off reserve. I'm not sure. I apologize for the language I'm using, but um, uh, they are First Nations people. Many of them live in cities, like live in Halifax, but many of them live uh, on um, uh, their own territory, their own nation. They live on their nation. But the response rates from those groups sometimes are low, which then in turn creates financial problems because they don't get financial rewards that they should be in that sort of thing. But it makes a mess. Getting good data is always a problem, and there are always going to be gaps. It's just how big is the gap. So the alternative is an experiment, a proper experiment, and that online we're doing this all the time. It's been actually going on for a long time. When when you go online, advertiser and Google is doing this to you, and others, Facebook does it. They'll post an ad. They may put it in the top right corner, bottom left corner. They may put it in a light shade of maroon or a darker shade of maroon. They may change the typeface. And what they'll do is usually make two variations or two versions of something. And randomly, one person gets version A, the other one gets version B, and it's purely random. And even for yourself, the next time you log in, you may end up seeing the other version just by chance, back and forth. And then they see, how do you respond? Do you click on the ad? Do you wave your cursor over the ad? They can measure that. How long do you look at something? Do you click through? What do you do? What's your response? And by doing that, they are doing an experiment on you. Experiments are very, very powerful tools, but they present a lot of ethical issues because, in a sense, they're randomly assigning treatments. But think in the healthcare context. Suppose you were in some of the studies on these vaccines that those. Oh, Thomas, you wanted to say something? You've got a hand up, or type your comment, and I'll try to answer. That I can't let you speak, unfortunately, with Top Hat. You're typing. Oh, mistake. It's okay. Um, that with the COVID thing, and this happens with medical trials, clinical trials you'll hear about, and it means one patient gets the real vaccine, the real drug, and the other one gets a placebo, something that's fake. It's not anything. Shouldn't hurt you, shouldn't help you either. And in many instances, most instances, is double blind. The doctor doesn't know either, can't influence you. And then they'll track those people and see how they respond. You've probably heard of placebo effect. Many people that participate in a study, even though they're not getting the real drug, seem to feel better. It's just because they think they should feel better. Um, so and we can measure how much that is in terms of that placebo effect and how much the real treatment happens. But uh, are you taking away a medication from an individual that really needs it, and they're going to suffer because they didn't get the real drug, or they died because they didn't get the real drug? There's a lot of ethical issues. What if I wanted to test in terms of different teaching styles? You signed up for my class. Maybe it was the time, maybe it was you chose the instructor. But for a number of courses, students consciously choose which instructor. Suppose I wanted to test the difference in instructional styles. And I said, you had to take it from this instructor and you have to take it from that one. Many students will say, that's not fair. I'm going to fail. You put me in so-and-so's class. That person is horrible. Assigning people to treatments, it's like making things mandatory. It Experiments, yeah, may raise ethical issues, but they give us great data, much better data, much better. And better data, that's data quality. What do we mean by quality? So we're going to look at this, the survey from 2010. Yeah, can I move over and cover up my face so I can see all the words here on this slide? One of them asked, how much did you earn last summer? It's on your survey. How much did you earn last summer? Now, on your survey, I've put limits on it. You can't give me an answer of $100,000. I think you can say $30,000 though. That and I think I may have asked you to the nearest thousand, because in the one in 2010 they just typed in numbers, and most of the numbers we'll see are 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, maybe 2,500. One said $9,655. Can you remember how much you earned last summer right down to the dollar? How did this person get 96.55? I don't know. That one said 650,025. I think the student meant $6,500, and somehow the 25 got on there by accident, like the accidental raising of a hand or whatever. You just that they're typing errors. We had students that said after graduation they hope to earn $500 a year. Like, no. I think maybe they wanted to say $50,000 a year, and again, made a typo. So we've got memory problems, data entry problems. Some of them may have said, I'm going to mess with the researcher and I'm going to give them a crazy number just to be annoying. They're not honest. Some questions and surveys, people aren't honest. They don't tell you the real answer. They're embarrassed by the real answer. And we'll see that there are a number of them that misunderstand the question that's being posed and pick out the wrong one. We get that, and we get it not just in surveys. A lot of data, not a lot. There's a modest amount of data in Banner that's wrong. That and those are different types of errors. That when you applied to St. Mary's, you clicked on things. You know what category, what high school you went to, or what university you may have transferred from. Maybe you clicked on the wrong one. We wouldn't pick that up. And so that there may be little things. Hopefully, they're not a big major consequence. In the fall term, a large proportion of fall term students are transfer students. I went and looked up students that I could look up and see if they were a transfer student or not, and I then looked up their transcript, and I should be able to see their transfer credits. A significant proportion of the students I looked up had no transfer credits. Why? Don't know, but there's probably an error in Banner. So think about it. Is the data what I think it is? Is it what I think I'm measuring it? Do I think it's coded consistently? We had coding errors because of different clerks coded things slightly differently. Made a mess. Hard to find, hard to clean up. That missing data is a real problem. Sometimes duplicates I generally don't get in the database, but when I'm extracting data from a database. But I will get duplicates. That last year didn't put proper controls on the survey, and we had some students that went in, started answering the survey, left it, came back again through a different path, and started the survey again, and maybe finished at that time, and I ended up with 2 sets of records for that student. So we've got to think about those. We've got issues about different types of data. This is sort of classic stuff about variables. It's a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on it. You'll see I'm sort of on the fence on some of it. But classically, we've thought of data as fitting into 4 categories. There may be more than 4 though now. One is nominal. Those are words. So your answer to a question, is it yes or no? What program are you in? Are you in arts or business or science? What's your gender? Those are nominal. Names. Nominal means name. But some of those words may have a sequence to them. There may be a rank order to them. So if I asked you how satisfied were you with your experience last term, and you were given choices of very satisfied, satisfied, neutral, dissatisfied, very dissatisfied. Those are all words, but they're in a sequence. And so they're in an order. So we call it ordinal. So ordinal means in an order. But they're still words. Some people will call both of those categorical data or qualitative data. Qualitative is maybe not quite right, but categorical fits it well. You fit into different categories, boxes. Numbers, though, are numeric data. Sometimes they're split between interval and ratio. I don't worry too much about the distinction. It's important between ordinal and nominal, but interval and ratio I don't think is that important. Those they're both ones where they're numbers and maybe we can do arithmetic on. We can look at average something. But with interval, there isn't a real zero. What does that mean? Temperature is the best example of interval data. That if I said that the temperature one day was 5 degrees and the next day was 10 degrees, is it twice as warm? Well, I don't know. Is that in Celsius or Fahrenheit, or what scale is it in of temperatures? What does zero mean? Ratio data, zero means something, has some real importance to it, and we can talk about positive and negative values. If one student earned $4,000 last summer and one earned $2,000, I know one earned twice as much as the other. I can calculate ratios. With temperatures, I can't calculate ratio. So the clue between the two is if you can calculate a ratio, divide one number by another, then it's ratio data. If you can't, but it's a number, it's interval data. And so I've talked about it, but uh, and normally we think that with interval ratio data, we can work at averages and other types of things, but with categorical data, we can't. Um, okay, at the end of the course, I'm going to give you a grade. A grade is ordinal data. An A is better than a B, better than a C, better than a D. And an A means excellent, B means very good, C means satisfactory, D is marginal, F is unsatisfactory. Okay? They're words. But then we give it points. You get quality points or grade points with these. I guess we call grade points. And so an A is worth 4, a D is worth 1, an F is worth 0. And then we work out your grade point average. Okay? If your grade point average is 2.7, what does that mean? You are B minus? If I go and translate it back from numbers to words, what does that mean? I really don't know. How can I average words? If I took all the words, cut them up in little bits of paper, round them up. No, it doesn't mean anything. It's round up words. Course evaluations, average score. What does that mean? I'm not quite sure. And then we've got all kinds of different data today. Text data, a lot of text data. That's a huge area that we're analyzing. But I've got Alexa in the kitchen. I can ask Alexa, who wrote this song, or play a song for me. And Alexa knows how to translate that sound data that Alexa is receiving. It translates that into something, I guess, analyzes it, does matching of different things, and then comes back and tells me something back again. So it processes that and that sound data that it's receiving. Uh, we do a lot, facial recognition software, all kinds of stuff that's looking at images information. That is data that's now, in the past, was particularly image and a lot of text data, expensive and challenging to capture and store, let alone analyze. Now it's cheap to do that. And they are developing the technologies to do the analysis. They need super huge computers or linking many computers together to do it well, but it can be done. The way they analyze it may be converting it into other formats. So uh, sound data is converted into numbers like frequencies or amplitudes, or I don't know. I don't know how you measure sound, but converted maybe into a cluster of numbers. Image is likewise measuring different things on color by assigning a number to different colors, intensity, brightness, uh, a variety of those types of things to define image, I guess. I don't know how they analyze it, but they are converting it into data that's categorical, nominal data. They're converting it into ratio data, that type of thing, and then analyzing that stuff. But at the outset, it's starting out as data that's very different from what we would have ever thought of before as data for data analysis. So, um, recap where we are. Oh, I did keep sort of on time. Amazing. I usually don't. I talk too long. That most problems, I said business problems, it doesn't matter if it's a business problem or any other type of problem, most are very poorly defined, very unstructured. That you should spend a significant period of time trying to put structure on it by taking the problem and maybe redefining that as a series of questions, issues. Take the questions and you're going to make them into maybe more specific ones. Get down to ones where you can measure it and you can think of having a specific answer to the question. So go through getting things we can measure. Imagine you have all the answers, you've measured them. So 36.4% of students were depressed last term. I don't know what the number is. Suppose it. Okay, I've got the number. What am I going to do with it? Is that useful to me? Can I operate with that? Maybe not by itself, but if I had the data from the year before, and the year before it was 19.7%, I'd be saying, hey, it's increased significantly. This is actionable thing. Maybe that one number by itself is enough. I need something to compare it to. I need a baseline. And there are a lot of problems where we don't have a baseline. Some of the questions on your survey that I've posed for you, I may not be able to use this year, but I'm using them to create a baseline for the class of the winter of 2022 to measure against. But they try to go through and think, have you answered the issue? If you've answered all these questions, have you solved your problem? Uh, and that takes a while going through that. You've got to start thinking about, well, it would be nice, it would answer my problem, but I can't get that data. Can I get something else instead? That if I wanted to study where our students are from, I may not know where they lived before they started at St. Mary's. That student I was dealing with, not in this class, but just before the term started, he was looking for advice on stuff. And I had to ask him, given his name, it was sort of a clue, whereabouts are you from? It appeared to be an Arabic name. And he said, well, I'm from Halifax. And I said, no, I, you have an accent, so you weren't born in Halifax. You are in Halifax now. And he had to explain that, well, he was from Jordan. No, he's not Jordanian. He was a Syrian refugee, and he had a path that went through. If I'm trying to get information about where students are from, even the data I've got about addresses may not tell me. I may have citizenship information, and I'll have to use that in place. But citizenship data may be deceptive, uh, that depending upon what we want to use the data for, and how do we want to interpret that? If we want to talk of it as an international student, which is a label that's used, a very crude label, what does that really mean? So sometimes it's going back and figuring out what's our data definition. But there are a lot of problems for which I can't get answer to the exact question I'd like, but maybe if I can answer this one over here, that might advise me where to go. That think about where you can get it. But most of the data you'll probably find in the end is observational data that you're not able to construct an experiment. If you're very thoughtful, sometimes we can get some data by experiment, but most of it's going to be observational. And then you've got to go back and think about, well, what problems is that going to present? That's, even though it's problematic and maybe questionable quality, doesn't mean it's garbage. That you're still going to have to work from it. And most of the data that you consume or that reports come from are of that nature. And you have to be careful about interpreting the data. The um, uh, but scales, they're going to be important. Sometimes we have to make a decision how we're going to measure the data. Uh, if I was worried about students making typos about how much they earned last summer, what if I just gave them specific options? Uh, under $1,000, $1,000 to $2,000, $2,000 to $4,000, $4,000 to $8,000, over $8,000. Could I work with that? Is that enough for me in doing things? Then I don't have to worry about precision of the numbers, and maybe it'll make it easier for them to answer. They can't remember exactly how much they earned, but they know it was probably 2,000 to 3,000. May make it easier. So the scale, but then by going to a different scale, I won't be able to work out averages in the same fashion. It's challenging. So tomorrow, or not tomorrow, today's Wednesday, Monday, we're going to be looking at Excel. And many of you probably have taken intro computers or have experience with Excel, or you've, but then there are others that forgot everything they were taught. Um, some of you may have never really worked with it, or you've worked with it in a firm, but they already had it scripted. You just put numbers in, took numbers out. You didn't really work with it. And very few students I've seen have really worked with Excel as a way of organizing data. So we'll be using it possibly differently than you have before. If you've seen it before, well, that's helpful. If you haven't, uh, that shouldn't be a problem. And if what I'm doing in Excel confuses you, you say, stop, Paul, go back, do it again. Can you show me how to do this? Uh, that So we'll be going through the very, very basics of organizing a data set in the class on Monday just to get it in a format that I can start looking at the data better and start potentially asking or answering questions from the data. But Monday's class will be focused on just getting it organized to get started. Um, again, tedious. It's something uh, some of my staff used to criticize me for, uh, correctly, because I wanted to rush to analyze it and I didn't like spending the time making it clean and organized. And then I ended up having problems later on. And they would have to go back and fix my mistakes. So um, patience is really important here. I see people typing. Um, no, it won't be quite the same file. We're going to use a couple files. we're probably going to focus primarily on two, but I will bring in a couple others. I will be posting the files on, I've posted one on Top Hat, I think, for this week 2. This is week 2 in that the week goes on until Monday. And it's the survey from 2010 of 811 students. And we're going to be working a fair bit on that data file that so that's the Excel part, the second half of chapter 2. That we've sort of covered off the first half of chapter 2, the stuff you need for the quiz on chapter 2. That you'll notice in the quiz there are no Excel questions. There won't be any Excel questions on your test number 1. There may be some on future ones, but I'll give you a good heads up and you'll have an idea of what that might be. It's hard to pose such technical questions in an exam, whether it be a multiple choice quiz or any other sort. But we'll be working on that one a fair bit. That I'm not asking you to do anything with it that's in the week 2 folder. That the data is posted there because it's referenced in chapter 2. So if you want to go in chapter 2 with the Excel portion, and there are a couple of little videos in there getting you to do different things, it's the data file that's used in those how-to videos, and it's the data file that's used for all the screenshots. So that you may, if you want to be working through that material in advance of Monday, go and try to follow the actions I did, and there's the data file that you can do it to. You download it to your computer. And but we'll be using it for a little while. Then I'm going to switch to another data file that has to do with credit card data, which I discovered this summer. I've been using it for a while, but I knew there was something strange about it. And I finally found who created it or first posted it online as an example file to analyze. And the fellow said that no, it was simulated. He created it for a specific purpose. I'm not sure if he realized what he had created, because it's a very fascinating file that when we get into value estimation, we're going to be using extensively, and it fits that chapter extremely well. It's a lovely data set. It's not real, unfortunately, but it's got some characteristics that are very close to what you might see in practice. But it's the survey data generally I'm using to give you exposure to what real data looks like. We may use another data file later on that is housing data on house prices and characteristics of homes. And that's real data that was captured of real house prices and characteristics of the different homes. And so we predict how much a house should sell for. What would be a good price for that house based upon the data? Again, there's some strange things in it, but for the most part, it's very clean data. So the one we're going to start with is the dirtiest data file that we've got. It's got lots of missing things. It's got lots of errors in the data of different types. And it's more representative, unfortunately, of typical data files you get in practice. And so we're going to be looking at how do you clean it? And are you creating problems by doing the cleaning? Are you creating, like in the election in the US, that's the debate. In cleaning the data, and different people want to clean it different ways of excluding votes of different people or including certain votes of various people, that those are processes involving cleaning of data. And there's the debate on whether or not those make it a better sample or a worse sample, more bias or less bias. Anyway, interesting stuff. So we're off till Monday. That if you've got questions on anything, please don't hesitate to contact me. That with any luck, I'll be back in Kingsburg on on by Monday, but I'm in Halifax this week. But take care. I think we've run out of time to end a class. Bye bye. Enjoy the sunshine. Little we've got.